centuries, made here only she, cut off in winter when the snows were deep. Oh, little Imber, cradled on the down, the only village for miles around. It was said to change back in 43. Their homes abandoned for the military. Oh, little Imber, cradled on the down, no more a haven, a battleground, chattering sound of binder and mill, rubble and timber, silent and still. Only the bells of old St. Giles toll across the miles. I see silhouettes steal across the plain. They come at nightfall, and I feel their pain. The wraiths of Imber gather on the down. They mourn forever, their sad ghost town, chattering sound of binder and mill, rubble and timber, silent and still. Only the bells of old St. Giles toll across the miles. Chattering sound of binder and mill, rubble and timber, silent and still. Only the bells of old St. Giles toll across the miles. Hello and welcome to another song from the Witch's House. It's now the month of February, and as you can probably see, we have slightly changed the way that we're doing things. Now I'm going to start with a couple of apologies. My dogs have just walked in the room and one of them does like to make quite a bit of noise. He's half pug, so you can probably hear him sort of chortling away. If you are tuning into this, I would ask you, if you believe in such things, to send some healing energy to my little dog, because he's got to have a big operation soon. Yes. And in fact, by the time this film goes out, he may well have had the operation and he'll need lots and lots of time to recuperate because it's a really big operation. Anyway, I started to say we're doing things a bit differently because you've already heard the song. We had a couple of comments from people saying they would prefer to hear the song first and then hear me droning on about it, probably because they don't want to bother listening to me. But that's okay, I won't take it personally. The other apology is I've not long been out the bath, so my hair's a bit of a mess. Well overdue to see the hairdresser, so hopefully when you see next month, I will be newly coiffured. We were hoping that we'd make another change this time as well, which was to have me doing a little bit of blurb on location, because if you were paying attention then you'll know that the song that you've just heard is about Imber, and Imber was a village on Salisbury Plain, and I had hoped to drive out somewhere and sit with Salisbury Plain in the background and do this little piece to camera. But January, as you know, has had such inclement weather. We've had 2 storms with special names. We've had some really high winds. We've had lots of floods. So it just wasn't practical. David said if I did that, the microphone would pick up too much wind noise. So the best I could do then was to introduce you to the song standing in front of my bookcase. Because when I wrote the words to Imber, I did lots of reading, and one of the books I read was this one, Little Imber on the Down. And if you were paying attention to the words of the song, you'll know that Little Imber on the Down was a line that I used in the chorus. So let me tell you then about the song Imber. I first heard about the village of Imber when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was off school one day and my mum made me a little bed on the couch and I watched TV. And one of the programmes I saw was a documentary about this village. So this village was quite unusual in terms of its location. It was set right in the heart of Salisbury Plain. Now, for any of you who don't come from Wiltshire and are not familiar with some of the stories and history, etc., Salisbury Plain is an area right in the heart of Wiltshire which covers about 300 square miles. So it's a vast area and it's not really inhabited and it's quite rugged landscape. And from about the early 1900s onwards, I'm going to hear my clock striking again, the MOD, or their predecessor, I think it was the War Office, commandeered Salisbury Plain to basically assist with their army manoeuvres and army training. So it's used by the military. Now, this little village, Imber, was right in the middle of the action, basically. And it was a very ancient village. It was recorded in the Domesday Book. So it's a village with about 1,000 years worth of history. And when you read books like this one, you'll see that over the years, the population of Imber has waxed and waned. But around about the 1940s, there were 250 people living there. And what was really unusual about Imber, as I say, was its location. It was said that you could stand at Imber and you could walk 7 miles in any direction before you came to other civilization. So you can imagine that it was a very, very remote location. When you read about the history, you can see that people there had it really tough, particularly when you go back to the 17 and 1800s and people didn't enjoy the modes of transport that they do today. It wasn't unusual if there was a really hard winter with heavy snowfall that people trying to leave Imber might perish because they might get disorientated by the snow, take the wrong direction and end up dying of hypothermia. I suppose the other side of the coin is that the people that lived there had a very close community. And I think Imber was quite a picturesque place. When you look at old-fashioned photographs, it had its fair share of thatched roof cottages. It had a windmill at one time, public house, manor house. You know, it was a thriving village. Anyway, what happened was, as you know, in the 1940s, the early 1940s, this country was in the middle of the war effort. And obviously preparing for the D-Day landings in 1944. And activity on Salisbury Plain became more intense. And it was felt that the people living at Imber were too close to the army's activities and therefore they had to be evacuated. So on the 2nd of November 1943, with not much warning at all, the 250 or so inhabitants of Imber were evacuated. And it was said that they were very much given the impression that after the war, they'd be able to return. And obviously, you know what I'm going to say. They weren't allowed to return, and even though there were quite a few local MPs who campaigned right up to the 1960s, the Imberians were never allowed to return to their village. And sadly, there's not much of it that remains now. I think, as I say, there's about 4 or 5 red brick buildings, the pub and manor house. Obviously, there's St Giles Church, which is on the hill. But most of the picturesque old buildings have been razed to the ground, and the army have taken it over. So it's a very sad story. I mean, they often say that an Englishman's home is his castle. And I think all of us, if we had to be displaced, would feel a real sense of your world being turned on its head. But particularly if you'd lived somewhere like Imber that was so far away from other civilization, it must have been a real shock to suddenly have to go and live somewhere much more populated. It said in one of the books that I read that the blacksmith, who I don't think was a particularly old man, he passed away very soon after the evacuation took place. And the doctor recorded on his death certificate that he died of a broken heart. I think that is such a sad story. So I decided that I'd like to go out and have a look at Imber, read a bit about it, and write a song to commemorate or remember the people who made that huge sacrifice. So I first went to Imber about 7 or 8 years ago. I took my mum and my 2 brothers. There are only certain days in the year when Imber is open. You have to basically join their mailing list, and they email and let you know when you can go. And you obviously have to stick to the paths, because there are lots of warning notices telling you not to stray, because obviously there could be unexploded munitions. So what I found particularly interesting was the journey to Imber, because it is such a remote location and you get a real sense of how vast Salisbury Plain is. And obviously, having lived in Wiltshire all my life, it's also quite exciting to venture somewhere where you're not normally allowed to go. But I think really what struck me was just the atmosphere of the place and the nature of the land. We're very spoilt in Wiltshire. We've got lots of rolling countryside, we've got lots of farmland. But when you look out at that type of landscape, you know that it's tended. You've got the farmers rotating their crops, you've got the nice tended hedgerows zigzagging through everything. And you can see that it's a land that changes every year because it's tended. But when you get out onto Salisbury Plain, it has a real wild, rugged atmosphere to it. And I think that's, you know, it strikes you when you're on your way to Imber. So I enjoyed my 2 trips to Imber, and I wrote these lyrics, I think it was around about 2014, 2015. And if you were listening carefully to the song, you'll hear that it starts off with something like a monastic chant. And that was deliberate because I wanted to give it a sense of the old Imberians who lived in a civilization that was rather cut off from everybody else. And I think David's been very clever in the way that he has evoked the sound of the military moving ever closer. You get this kind of drum that starts up and a sense of something military happening. It would have been a little bit of a dirgy song had we not stepped it up a little bit in the chorus. But in the chorus, I wanted to evoke the sense of what life might have been like in a village like Imber in years gone by, perhaps in the 1800s or early 1900s, where perhaps they gathered in the harvest together. They might have had country dances, dancing around the maypole, threshing, that type of thing. And I think, if I remember rightly, David used an ocarina, which I think is quite an attractive sound, and it does very much evoke village life. So that's our song about Imber. And as I say, it's not a commercial song. It is quite somber, but we wanted to tell the story of what happened to the poor old Imberians. And I am reliably informed that the last funeral that took place at Imber was only last year in the churchyard of St Giles. And that related to a man in his 80s who'd been a boy of about 7 or 8 when he was evacuated from Imber back in 1943. So, yeah, that's the story of Imber. And I suppose if we're thinking generally, we should have sympathy with anybody who's displaced. There's lots of people in the world at the moment, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Ukraine, who knows what it's like to have to just get up and leave all your worldly goods behind. So again, the song's available on Bandcamp if you'd like to go and purchase it. And we will be here next month to give you a few more songs. We might even be able to give you one on the new moon. We're working very hard to do that. I was talking about crystals last time, and if you're paying attention, I have got my amethysts on today. I've got my amethyst ring and bracelet. If you're into crystal healing, then amethysts are supposed to be good for infections, mental burdens. I even saw some reference to cancer, but I think I'd probably take that with a pinch of salt. But February is the month for amethysts. So as I say, you learn all sorts of things on this channel. Anyway, once again, thank you so much for paying attention, for listening to our songs. Please like and subscribe. Please remember my dog Bugsy and send him some healing energy. And until we meet again on the next full moon, some witchy magic coming your way.